Greetings from Bucharest. Today I invite you for a walk in a city, and I would like to share with you a few thoughts about Eastern Orthodoxy. What is it like to plant a Reformed church in an Eastern Orthodox context? I'm walking through a very nice park here in the downtown area where you can stop and find a little bit of peace in a very busy city. You can hear the birds singing, and it's also very nice to stay in the shade when outside it's very sunny, it's hot and humid. There is a lot of Eastern Orthodox propaganda in Western countries, and that propaganda tries to portray the Eastern Orthodox Church as this unique, special church that has not been affected by all the problems, by all the bad things in Western churches, and that the Eastern Orthodoxy is somehow this ancient, unique, purely kept faith, purely kept church, which is the solution to all the problems, because you just avoid all the Western problems, all the dilemmas, all the bad things by becoming Eastern Orthodox. So this propaganda has caused many people in Western countries, even in North America and some in Western Europe, even Protestants, to abandon Western Christianity and become Eastern Orthodox. But today I would like to speak a little bit about Eastern Orthodoxy, about our context here, about church planting here in an Eastern Orthodox country, also to shed some light on what lies hidden beyond that shallow propaganda that has been deceiving so many people. So what is Eastern Orthodoxy like? Here are some things you need to know about Eastern Orthodoxy. First of all, Eastern Orthodoxy is profoundly sectarian. It separates itself from the rest of the church, not only from an institutional point of view, but also it refuses to learn from the broader church. And this has not only been the case since the 11th century, when they officially split from the rest of the church, but also before that, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Eastern churches, they developed certain views in isolation from the broader church, and they refused to learn from the wisdom, from the wealth of teaching of the broader church. So that is one reason why the churches in the East, they were never in any way influenced by Augustinianism. The theology of St. Augustine in the West was very influential in recovering the teaching of the Apostle Paul, but the East has never really been interested in that, because it was influenced by other views. And this sort of leads me to my next thought, which is the fact that Eastern Orthodoxy has a very narrow theological focus, which excludes so much of what we see in the New Testament. The focus of the Eastern Orthodox theology excludes any dealing with the law of God and any forensic or legal aspect of our state before God and our salvation from a legal point of view. This doesn't mean just that it's difficult to teach people about justification because the churches around us don't think in those kinds of terms. But it's also difficult to teach people that they're guilty before God, because guilt is not really a concern in Eastern Orthodoxy. People are not taught to relate to the law of God, to understand their guilt. So the law of God is not being read in Eastern Orthodox liturgy. There's really no confession of sin in the liturgy, well, apart from the Lord's Prayer, which is recited. But this has an impact on the broader culture because people do not think in terms of guilt. They would rather think in terms of shame. And although guilt definitely brings shame, guilt makes us understand that we have offended God. It's not about being ashamed in front of other people. That's not the big issue. That's not the big problem of sin. The big problem of sin is that we are guilty before God. We're under the judgment of God as sinners. And because this is absent from Eastern Orthodoxy and it's really absent from the culture, we have to work really hard in convincing people they are guilty before God. And when I say that guilt is absent from the broader culture, I really mean it is absent from other aspects of life too. People don't really think about laws. They don't really care about laws. When they are thinking what they should do and what they should not do, they think in terms of what are the things they can get away with in front of other people, not being ashamed. So they don't really think what does the law say. They think what kind of behavior, what kind of life will other people around me find acceptable or tolerable, even though it's against the law. And you can see this even from the way people are driving, from the way people are behaving in their neighborhoods. You can see the absence of guilt in their mind from the smallest things in life to the most important things in life. So it's not just about religion. This has a big impact in the way people live generally. They don't really think about the law of God. They don't really think about the law of the government. So when we teach people the Christian faith, when we teach people about the law of God, it's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of thinking that we need to bring to people. And of course, in some sense, this applies everywhere, even in countries with a Roman Catholic background. People don't want to obey the law of God. They don't want to think they're guilty. But here it's even a bigger problem. Like discussions about guilt, thinking about guilt is even more difficult than in other places. Another big problem in Eastern Orthodoxy is the emphasis on mysticism. There is a lot of concern with mystical things, and especially with wonder-working icons and wonder-working relics, getting your holy water from the church at certain times of the year. And there's also, a really horrible aspect of all this. Like if you see how that holy water is made with mixing some of those bones, some of those relics from dead Christians in the water, it really shows how weird and grotesque this is. But mysticism is emphasized to the point where education, Christian teaching suffers. Eastern Orthodoxy is less about learning through doctrine and more about experiencing the liturgy, going to get in touch with those relics, getting the holy water. It's less about knowing, and it's more about being involved in all sorts of worship activities or worship-like activities. It's all about trying to get in touch, in contact, about experiencing a higher power, transcendent reality. And that's why it's not even meant to be intelligible. In the Eastern Orthodox liturgy we have here, they use such an old language that it can barely be understood. It's also chanted, which makes it even more difficult to understand. So many times people would go to the liturgy and they can barely understand what's being said, because it's not the common language and it's not the common way of communicating. But for those who think it's okay, for those who think that church is supposed to be this way, they approve of it, because they feel like they have approached something mysterious, which gives meaning to their life, or makes their life more interesting. Eastern Orthodoxy here is also profoundly affected by theological liberalism, and that's because many people, many priests here have gone and studied, did master's degrees and PhDs in Western European countries, where they have been influenced by liberal theology. And even some of the seminaries here and some of the professors here in the Eastern Orthodox communities, they have started teaching some liberal theology, even higher criticism. There are even Eastern Orthodox professors who would say that probably most of the Old Testament is just a myth, didn't really happen. So you really get full-blown liberals among the faculty of Eastern Orthodox seminaries here. So when you mix all the ingredients together, when you take the lack of guilt, there's no guilt, when it's all about something mystical, something archaic, when it's all about a mystery that's not intelligible, when it's all about getting to those bones and drinking that water which was mixed with parts from dead bodies, when you add in modernity, modern thinking, you end up with no Christianity at all. And that's why most people here, although they would identify culturally as Eastern Orthodox, and they would say they're Eastern Orthodox when there's a census, most of them do not believe anything really connected to the Eastern Orthodox doctrine or to the Christian doctrine. We have about 200 Eastern Orthodox churches here in Bucharest, and that means that less than 5% of the population attends church on Sunday, because we have 2 million people and all these 200 churches, they're pretty small. So when you do the math, you realize that most of the population does not worship on Sunday, and they do not believe the Christian faith. But unbelief doesn't really matter as long as you get those rituals before you die or after you're dead, as long as the priest comes to your funeral and does all that he needs to do, all those mystical things, you're fine. There's no guilt. The law of God doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter if you believe or not. You're being tolerated by the church. If you can get away with unbelief and remain an Eastern Orthodox and get all your rituals done, you're fine. So the Eastern Orthodox Church is really corrupt, really perverted, because it tolerates unbelief, and it tells people which do not believe at all in Christ. They won't even agree that Jesus is raised from the dead. The church tells those people that they are fine, that it's all taken care of by what the things that the priests do. And of course, Eastern Orthodoxy didn't used to be this way in the ancient time. Even in the medieval time, unbelief was not tolerated. But Eastern Orthodoxy today is not what used to be in the past. So what does this all mean for our church planning work here in Bucharest? It actually means that we are planning a Reformed church in a city where the culture is influenced by Eastern Orthodoxy, but not the religion. I mean, the religion is not influenced by Eastern Orthodoxy. The religion of people is just paganism. It's agnosticism. It's whatever your average European believes and does not believe. That's what people in Bucharest believe. So theologically, they're not Eastern Orthodox. Culturally, though, they've been influenced by Eastern Orthodoxy. So in the past, the Ottomans came here, the Hungarians ruled over Transylvania, the northwestern part of the country. So there were some religious conflicts with the Muslims, with the Hungarian Protestants. So there is a fear of outsiders coming and trying to take away your religion, whatever that means now in the 21st century, when most Romanians don't really believe the Christian faith. But there is this sense of national identity tied with Eastern Orthodoxy, and also there is a way of thinking that's been shaped by Eastern Orthodoxy when it comes to guilt and lack thereof. But generally, though, we are not really that concerned with Eastern Orthodoxy, because although statistics show that over 95% of people in Bucharest are Eastern Orthodox, in reality, under 5% of them are Eastern Orthodox. The size of the Eastern Orthodox Church here in Bucharest is under 5%. Under 5% of people actually believe anything related to Eastern Orthodox doctrine. So we don't really have to deal that much with Eastern Orthodox polemics. We have very few instances where we have to explain to people why Eastern Orthodox teachings and Eastern Orthodox practices are wrong, because people around us don't believe them. So we don't have to convince most people that icons are weird, and it's weird to go to church and kiss those icons, and it's weird to and wrong to do that thing with the bones and the bodies of dead Christians. So that's not really an issue. That's not our focus. But we do have to keep in mind some of the cultural implications of Eastern Orthodox past, the way people are afraid to be in touch with a different church, and all other things, other marks that Eastern Orthodoxy have left on the thinking of people. And in this context, the Reformed doctrine and practice, the Reformed worship service is great, because we do have a historic liturgy, so we do have some things that they would recognize, and it's also intelligible. So it's a liturgy that makes sense. It's a worship service. It's where you learn, you understand things, and you also worship in a reverent manner. So there are things in the historic Reformed liturgies that appeal to Eastern Orthodox people, and we had several people who were glad to come to our church services because they realize they can finally go to a church where they understand, where they learn.